G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle. I don't intend to continue talking about this particular topic, but I want to talk about one common argument I've received and the complexity that sits below the surface before I move on to, onto a nice palate cleanser, because I really want to talk at the moment about some hobby I've been working on in the background and some idea surfing. So next video expect from me will be on that instead of the old world. But the statement I really saw a lot of lately is that fantasy is going really well in my area with lots of returning players. We have more players than ever in our group. People are playing in Tabletop Simulator. So this comment, on the surface sounds entirely positive and will become a long-term success. But let's break down the statement by section and examine what's actually occurring, because there's a lot to unpack here thanks to people having a very narrow understanding of what constitutes system health, and also because, I overanalyze things. So, they say fantasy is going well in my area with lots of returning players. So let's look closer. Returning players are a captured crowd, right? Not much has to be done to get them or retain them. They have established armies, they're simply ready to go in any edition with just a few tweaks or changes. However, for Games Workshop, these players are a low priority. If they want something, this customer will just buy it for themselves. They don't need to be talked into it necessarily. In addition to this, the customer can represent an additional roadblock, as they may have a larger collection of resources from old versions of the game. They may just want to utilize the old world. And the releases that come out is a great way to get some, missing bits for their collection. These players might prefer a older edition, thanks to several reasons, because it might have more flavour, might have more characters, more units, better balance, and those kind of criteria. And I'm not saying that 6th edition or 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy is the definitive edition, but for some people, this will be how they feel. This doesn't make the new game bad by default, but you have to realise that this is a limitation, which does make it harder to have a community all on the same page. Horus Heresy, it had a relatively smooth transition into the 2nd edition of the game. But that was thanks to a current strong following and dozens of brand new kits, which helps to revive a game's sort of appeal, versus taking a decade-old game that's had no support in that time, with miniatures legally old enough to drink at current-day prices. Like it or not, this is the distinct reality. It is different to the Heresy. It's different to the other specialist games. These old players are most likely, but not always, going to be bare minimum spenders and a self-directing crowd. Games Workshop has shown with their actions over the last 3 decades, they will basically not invest any effort into curating that kind of crowd, and therefore are unlikely to try and cultivate their needs. The next part of the statement is, we have more players than ever in our group. Now, the big thing here is, are they effective players? And what do I mean by this? Well, are these players coming in with the intent to buy, to build, to paint, and to play the game? Or are they just a curious person who's watching the group? Do they actively participate in the group? Are their hobby goals in alignment with the broader group goals? Are they an impulsive buyer who cannot commit or complete a project? If so, they are great in that initial period, the period of hype and FOMO purchasing that happens, which, at the time I'm recording this, we're in that window for the old world. And if so, they're fantastic for the bottom line of Games Workshop, but will not commit to longer term purchases because they're the proverbial goldfish in the bowl. They have the 3-second memory, and the next thing that drops, they jump on that and stop buying for this. Are they a person who solely 3D prints, therefore underrepresented financially, but also unable to play at official events, not contributing financially to Games Workshop's cause? Are they a Games Workshop miniatures only enthusiast who only likes the Games Workshop models and will refuse to associate with other miniature brands or prints? If so, they may have a very different participation model to others. What if they're a TO who is very pro Games Workshop? They may prevent people with printed armies playing in their events, which will not be helpful to long-term game health. There is also a sizable contingent of players who are only interested in online games, which, although they should not be discouraged from participating as people, should always be, generally welcomed into community if they share common goals. But these people will we'll cover them sort of in depth shortly. I'll probably circle back to it, but they're the most ineffective players around. They have almost zero to actually contribute to the hobby. And this sounds really harsh, but trust me, it's true. Like I said, I'll circle back around to it, I think. But while I'm on this train of thought, you also have members who are keen to play. They'll have built up a sizable force. They may even be creating content for the game. Those are effective players, the most effective players, right? They're buying into the game, they're actively hobbying, they're encouraging others, and contributing on multiple levels. If your group has a sizable proportion of these, that's the ideal. The Horus Heresy has this, okay? And that is in part a major contributing factor regarding the health of the system globally. Now, the final segment of the statement that I was talking about earlier is that we have more players than ever in our group and people playing games in Tabletop Simulator. And this is where I think I'll circle back to that point, because these players are not healthy for a system as they're uninvested players. There is no financial stake, no output required, no miniatures purchased, no miniatures painted, no insights to offer beyond their theories on the rules of the system. An uninvested player is Games Workshop's worst nightmare, and a bit of an issue for the community too, as, well, they have no reason beyond the current enjoyment they derive from the game, the moment they're living in, the here and now, for them to stick around and actually participate in the system long term. It's just the lowest tier category of effort possible to participate in the game. It's one level above doing literally nothing. Now, I don't say this to ruin their time, by the way, or to look down on them or anything like that, but we need to, as functioning human adults, I know it's hard on the internet, but we need to realize that, Tabletop Simulator is not the hobby. It's a simulation of the hobby. And the company will not support a system because simulated players like it here and now. It's completely non-effective. While I'm on this, I want to share some additional points as well on the situation, provide some more context as I see it, because firstly, regards Games Workshop being the hobby, they're not, but they provide the easiest entry barrier. In fact, let's talk about that. There are multiple, barriers to entry, and I don't know, it needs a cool, term or a cool name. Let's call it the hobby entry barrier pyramid, right? So, the bottom four of this pyramid, think like the food pyramid. It begins with Games Workshop. They're the first and foremost sort of point of entry, being the IP owner with retail outlets. They're stocking the largest quantity of hobby supplies and product knowledge for the layperson. They're the face of the hobby, because people who are coming into the hobby have to start somewhere. The easiest place for that to happen is probably a Games Workshop. The second layer in this pyramid would probably be the IP being sold, by third parties and stuff. So, second layer of our pyramid, third-party retailers. It's still Games Workshop products, but most likely, poorer quality advice on the game and purchase recommendations front, because they're stocking a variety of game systems. They're probably not going to be fully across all the Games Workshop systems, I guess the third layer of the pyramid is probably going to be proxies, and I'm thinking plastic and resin. We should separate this out, because plastic proxies, think like Mantic Games, okay? Kings of War. You can produce a similar product to Games Workshop for much less price and requires less skill to be built and paint than resin miniatures, which would be the fourth layer, which should be, resin, metal, maybe recast, 3D printed, that top, the peak of the pyramid, I'm thinking. These miniatures are often harder to acquire, they need specialist equipment to work with, you need more knowledge about hobbying, and, without the guidance of trained staff to assist you in your purchasing of these things, it can be quite difficult. Things like 3D printing are daunting to many people, and those of us who regularly conduct it, you kind of lose sight of that fact. So I'd say the barrier of entry pyramid assumes that people coming into the hobby are the least knowledgeable people, right? Because they're new customers. They pretty much don't know a thing except what they might have seen in a computer game or a movie, And as a person gains information and confidence in the hobby, they tend to climb this pyramid, to ascend it. But for many, they never leave that ground floor because, because of this fact, that's the general assumption that, Games Workshop likes these people. They like them because it's easy to get them to buy from Games Workshop, right? They have deep pockets and no concept of competition or what miniatures should cost because they can't compare it to, what's the bar they measure it against? If you tell them it has to cost this much, they'll just go, oh, okay. So, whilst people may make, these grandiose statements about not needing Games Workshop due to the other layers of this pyramid, I think it's far harder to engage people in the first place. Because remember, the face of the hobby is Games Workshop. Not needing the company for the hobby is a sign of the established hobbyist who understands the game system already, who can write their own rules. But that segment is far smaller than the potential pool of players out in the world. Sustaining a dead system such as Battlefleet Gothic it's a completely different beast to living systems like Age of Sigmar. In the case of Battlefleet, it can and it does get new players, but they have never been, in my experience at least, new players from scratch. They've never seen Warhammer in their life, and the first thing they pick up is Battlefleet. It doesn't matter that there's a community out there that is supporting Battlefleet Gothic in this case. It only matters for established Warhammer fans who can get introduced to it, to this more obscure system, this more obscure side of the hobby, and want to explore it, because they already understand the universe that's taking place in. It's not much of a leap for them to do that. Whereas walking out to a random person on the street and saying, hey, you want to play Battlefleet Gothic? They're just going to look at you like the crazy person you are. And the barrier to entry can be made more difficult by Games Workshop's retail practices, which can just outright stop a person in their tracks before even ascending the pyramid. Case in point, right? I'm going to throw this out there. Let's paint a scenario. A Total Warhammer player, right, loves the game. They play Total Warhammer 1, Total Warhammer 2, 3, they buy all the DLCs. This person walks into a Games Workshop store, right? And they're like, I heard about this old world thing. I wanted to come check it out for myself. And they have no concept of 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battles. They don't know 40k. They don't know a thing about recast, 3D printing, right? I mean, they know it exists, but they don't know about it in the hobby space. But, they've seen Games Workshop store. Maybe they've walked past it before. And they decide they're going to go into the store and pick, let's say, Wood Elves, right? Easy one for me to talk about. And they're greeted by, let's say, the world's most friendly manager in Warhammer. He won't sabotage himself. He won't try and direct them to a 40k starter set. He's just a genuine human being trying to do the best job he can. This manager has to now tell this potential customer that actually there is a book, and it's this large expensive one here, but there are currently no models for it. He may even show you some Age of Sigmar models that are available, but of course that's a different game, and most of the miniatures don't cross over. So the manager is unlikely to be able to point them in the direction of things like 3D prints because, well, that's going to undercut the store, and it's probably not Games Workshop policy to notify people how much they're being ripped off. So he's probably not going to, tell the customer that. And if the customer even was able to find and print a 3D, army of Wood Elves, he's not getting a game in that store. And this guy is not part of a local gaming group yet, right? He's a new player. He's a new hobbyist. So he doesn't know a thing about getting into the old world beyond the Games Workshops where I go to play games. So for this guy, this is a problem. And the guy managing the store is a nice human, but he's not an idiot, right? Maybe the old world, interested Total Warhammer player, the old world curious player, he asks when the Wood Elves will be in, but the Games Workshop manager, he doesn't know because, GW doesn't like leaks, so they haven't told him when it's happening. They just say, there's a big release coming in, September. He's like, well, I don't know, maybe I regret to inform you, come back in 6 months' time. Maybe I can give you some advice then, or keep an eye on Warhammer Community. And that's kind of it for what he can do. So what do we think the outcome of this scenario will be? Maybe he joins an online group where there are really knowledgeable people who can guide this potential Wood Elf player in the correct direction, but which person is giving him the advice, What if they're giving him faulty advice? These are questions that are hard to answer, but I'm confident in saying that this will be a confusing and potentially unsatisfying experience for that potential player, and unlikely to result in an actual new customer. In addition to this, part of the draw of these games is that the characters and units are out there. But when missing units make up most of the model range for a faction, and the faction is a semi-obscure PDF, it adds an additional hurdle into the challenge. if we repeated that same scenario, right, but instead of wood elves, we'll do lizardmen, right? Many of the models which would work well in lizardmen have been just replaced outright by newer, larger, harder to rank up, more expensive Age of Sigmar miniatures. I mean, lizardmen's a great example. Which is why I'm picking it, because if you took 40 Saurus Warriors in Australia, that's 30% more expensive than buying the entire Bretonnian starting set, which has over twice as many miniatures. Now, I'm not trying to sell you one way or the other on what is better, Age of Sigmar or World, that's not important here, but it's a legitimate consideration, for system health. We also can't forget another factor, which is event play. Many people will never play in a Games Workshop tournament, but they will play in a local scene. This local scene, what are they going to do? Are they going to adjust rules to suit the system as currently designed? Because some factions have journals, which are going to give them additional content. Do you support that as a community? It's going to give them additional stuff the PDF armies just don't have, right? If you do allow the PDF forces, which at the time of writing have been directly stated to receive no support from the company, well, you can pretty much assume that therefore they're not going to receive any PDF FAQs or anything. It's going to make it harder to incorporate them into events unless the organisers come up with one. This is further complicated by the need to potentially travel to multiple events or multiple gaming groups in different locations. Each of these probably have their own house rules. So this is a consideration for many people, and even if it doesn't affect you, the person listening, you have to at least be mature enough to acknowledge it is a problem for a percentile of players, a decent percentile of players. And in addition to all of that, what is the outcome? If you're playing only supported factions at events, well, you've literally relegated half of the armies available, some of whom are incredibly popular. Vampire counts, Dark Elves, as an example, you're relegating them to irrelevance, because at the same time as you're doing that, you're ensuring that you're going to see the same armies repeated over and over again with the same limited unit pool. While I'm thinking about it, the point I made in the previous video about the Horus Heresy and how some people hate the game because of the Marine focus, rightly or wrongly, doesn't matter, they treat it as if the Legion force is one single army and therefore plays identically every game. And I feel people have misunderstood what I'm trying to say here. It's that Marines have 3 times the number of units available to them, just the base Marines, of the average Old World faction. And that's in just the basic lineup, right? That's before the inclusion of legacy units, exemplary battles, additional books, and of course Legion-specific rules. This means that the potential unit pool and tactics has far more diversity available when it comes to constructing lists. Warhammer the Old World, on the other hand, does not have this, especially with the more stringent list construction rules. I will point out, again, another disclaimer here, because, it's not that I'm against the system or overstating that Heresy is a better system. It's just that there is no need to type a comment, okay? I'm trying to say it just means that after a few dozen games versus Tomb Kings, you've probably exhausted their gameplay pool, right? Versus a Legion army in Heresy, where you could face a tank army, and then the next time you play the same person, it could be an airborne army, a recon force, a tactical marine spam force, a breacher force, close combat themed army, and then they might choose a different Legion and go through all of those cycles again, and it's going to feel very different when you're getting charged by Emperor's Children versus getting shot by Imperial Fists. Versus playing the Tomb Kings, that's going to get very old very quickly when there's a bare fraction of the number of units available. And it is a massive consideration for many, not all, but many players. If you're throwing away half of the factions, you need to compensate in various ways to offset this. And I think that's where the journals and down the line campaign books come in. But, like anything, people, myself especially as I get older, I don't want to wait a decade for a fully functioning system that then gets supplanted the next year because that's what happened with Heresy. It needs to be done in a decent time frame. And I think the last point I want to touch on before the end of this video is that, the age of the miniatures is a fundamental issue for huge sections of the community. This is because many people do not want old miniatures at 2020's prices. I was the first to stay. I mean, openly, I put a video up saying that, look, the price is fair. I'm not saying it's acceptable. I'm saying it's fair. This is because, like, if you go back and you just took these same kits at the price they last sold for at Games Workshop and you just added inflation onto the price, it's where it should be, right? There's no tricks or anything in there. But put that into contrast, what is accepted practice in other industries where over time, when something gets old or you've made a lot of it, it becomes cheaper as the manufacturing process is now refined. It's easier to make, it's more predictable what the outcome's going to be, the economy of scale, all of this, right? Even Lockheed Martin has dropped the price year on year for F-35 fighter jets. So if the military-industrial complex is seeming more reasonable with their pricing than Games Workshop, you can draw your own conclusions to that, right? And as with the other points in this video, you may be fine with it, right? But remember, other people are not. And human beings, we're horrible creatures, and we rarely agree on these things. But when I'm looking at these scenarios and making my opinion-based videos, this is the logic I'm using, and I'm explaining it in longhand for you all today, in the spirit of openness and in fostering this discussion. And this is the evidence I'm drawing upon. Whilst I want Old World to be successful for the participants' sake, I'm under no illusions that after a decade of specialist games just pumping and dumping products onto the customer, with communities growing during that hype cycle immensely, but then slowly shrinking back down, returning to their pre-support levels within about a year, I think it's only logical that the Old World will fall into the exact same trap, regardless of the wishful thinking, because you have it. You, listening to the video, you have all the evidence in the world you need to have seen this practice literally play out in your life. So, you don't need to tell me what you think about the situation. I'm like, I feel it's in a good place. You can either accept that this is a historical trend with Games Workshop, or you can pretend that this is going to be different, and I doubt it's going to be different, okay? That's the logical takeaway here. The Old World will fall into the same trap, and I believe this process is made worse by the limitations of the system that I mentioned. Older sculpts, less factions, restricted support, etc. This is going to affect the game more than several other systems suffer, such as Heresy or Middle-earth, which I consider to be equal tiers of game. And you know what? Another thing I want to talk about is the comment a few people made, which is that this will kill Age of Sigmar, right? And I know this is sidetracking, and I should have wrapped up the video there, but you have to understand what Age of Sigmar means to Games Workshop, okay? It's not going to get killed by the Old World. Age of Sigmar is an IP that they have total control and copyright for. It's their flagship game. It's a key focus with constant releases throughout the year, due for an unnecessary new edition in June probably, with a vast and brand new range of sculpts in the game. Age of Sigmar may not be your cup of tea, but Games Workshop is doing more to support it than they are for the Old World, considerably more. They've got constant releases on the tables, they've got novellas and books, they've got full faction support, and in-store, they take up a huge amount of the retail floor space. The Old World will sell huge numbers right now, in the hype and FOMO period. And Games Workshop's next financial statement will reflect that the hype and FOMO-driven sales has bought them money, right? It does every time. But remember, Aeronautica Imperialis, Legion Imperialis, they both sold gangbusters on release. So initial sales are not a sign of health, only poor financial discretion on behalf of consumers. And I'm not here to judge your spending habits, no matter how much it sounds like I am. I'm here just trying to get across the idea that at the end of the day, sales and group growth at the moment of release, that is, it's not the definition of health. If you want more proof of the concept, look at movies. Look at a movie like, showing my age here, but I remember when Batman vs. Superman was coming out and did huge numbers in that first weekend because the hype is real. But then reality sets in, people tell one another, don't go see it, it's an awful movie, and then it's forgotten. It becomes a flop, and the next movie, though, has already come in. It's on the horizon. People who are like, I could go see Batman vs. Superman, go, you know what? instead of going to see that, I'm going to save my money and I'm going to go see Marvel's Civil War next week instead, because it came out the week after, and that's exactly what happened. But, it's just, this is my logic, this is my opinion. It's based on what I think should be obvious logic. But as per the last video, what I think is unbeatable, flawless, unbreakable logic, someone else will come along, pick it apart, because they've got their own unbeatable, unpickable logic. So, you know what, guys? Help yourself to the comments below. Let me know your feedback, and like I said on the last video, which people just seemed to totally ignore, if I'm giving you all these facts about the situation, about the pump and dump hype release cycle, the types of miniatures that are popping out, appropriate price points, group requirements, what some people will and won't be into, how this could have an effect on events, how it could affect people getting into different factions in the first place, they're all very real, very tangible points, okay? So remove the emotion for a second from, well, I wanted to be successful, therefore I'm going to tell Macca he's just salty. Remove that from the equation, because I don't care if you think I'm salty. Prove me wrong is my dare, my challenge. Say why it's a non-issue that people can be interested in the old world, walk into a store and be able to buy none of the miniatures for the faction they're interested in. Tell me how that's a good thing for promoting the health of the system. Because that's a legitimate problem, and you need a legitimate fucking counterpoint for me to care about your opinion. And if you can't bring that to the table, then your opinion and mine are no longer equal, right? Everyone's opinion is, equal until such time as someone comes in and is able to bring some sound points of logic and, claw ahead in the argument, in the debate, score those points on the board. And if the other person just can't counter it, can't bring any good counterpoints, they can call you salty all they like. It doesn't fix the problem that they have no counterpoints. So my challenge to you is come in with the proper counterpoints. Explain to me why it's a good thing that the old world Warhammer player who plays Total Warhammer can go into the store, not find the models he's after, not find the books he's after, any of that, but how somehow that's a good thing for the system's health and how this will help it long term. I'd be really interested to hear what the thought train is there. Anyway, that's it for me. I'm the Salty Circle, and I'll see you on the next video.